Alright, so everyone even remotely interested in PC hardware would know by now that graphics cards right now are extremely hard to come by for a decent price, whether it be on the new or used market. But if you are going to look for a graphics card, your best bet right now is, of course, looking on the used market. To give you guys a bit of perspective on the current situation, I own a GTX 1070 I bought last year for €200 used. And now I'd have to be growing money on trees to buy one for the used €400 price tag you see them online for. So if you haven't realized by now, the 1070 is not an option, and nor is about 90% of all graphics cards out there right now. So let's steer clear of those highly demanded cards and let's go back in time to something a bit more modest. My brother recently bought this GTX 670 for €60. A couple of months back this would have been a bit more pricey than what I would have expected, but now I think it's a relatively good price. This model specifically is a blower style EVGA card, so I expect it to run a little warmer than its axial fan counterparts, and maybe a little louder. But as a benefit, blower style cards send the hot air straight out of the case, so they help other PC parts with thermals. The GTX 670 was released back in June 2012, making it now 9 years old. That might sound quite old, but trust me, given the right care, a graphics card can last a surprisingly long time. Back then this card was considered mid to high range, but of course that isn't the case anymore and is now considered a low-end GPU. Now, when I say low-end, there are a ton of low-end cards out there, and grouping them in the same performance bracket is awfully vague, so keep that in mind. So the first thing I noticed about this card is that it looks pretty good. I love how EVGA make relatively simplistic cards, and on top of that I've always been a fan of how blower style cards look. In my opinion, it looks pretty good in the case, and when the front glass panel is on, it's not so loud either. On the back of the card you will find 2 DVI ports, 1 DisplayPort and 1 HDMI port. Like any Nvidia graphics card, installing drivers is as easy as anything, so nobody should really have any problems there. Of course I've given my opinion on looks, and I'll say it again, I think it's a good looking card, but that's not what you're paying for in a card, is it? This card has a 4GB variant and a 2GB variant, this specific card being the 2GB variant. And to be quite frank with you guys, 2GB of VRAM is not a lot in 2021. But with that said, I don't think it's too little either. The VRAM is clocked at 6008 MHz, the core clock is 915 MHz, and it's got a 980 MHz boost clock. And finally, it has 1344 CUDA cores. It's not the most power efficient card out there either. It uses 2 6-pin PCI connectors and has a TDP of 170 watts, so I would recommend a decent 450 watt power supply at the very least. But personally, the lowest I would go would be 500 watts. And since this card isn't very power efficient, the more efficient the power supply, the better. Now let's take a look at how it performs, because a card can look as good as gold, but if it can't perform, well, what's the point? So I'm going to pair the 670 with a Xeon E5 1680V2 and 16GB of 2133 MHz RAM running in quad channel. This is way more than enough to show us the performance of the GTX 670 bottleneck free. So let's get right into it. Alright, so remember, that right now is a €60 graphics card. Personally, I was surprised. GTA 5 ran perfectly in my opinion, and that was at the highest settings, just without anti-aliasing. Something a little bit like a console experience, but with a slightly higher frame rate and better graphics overall. F1 2020 defaulted at 900p medium settings and we got a flawless result. I reckon you could probably get away with 1080p high settings with a consistent 60 FPS. Problem was I was in a bit of a rush when benchmarking and finding the resolution option was taking way too long, so I never ended up testing 1080p. So overall, I think this card is perfectly suitable in 2021. Just don't expect to play all new AAA titles on max settings. So if you're being realistic here, I see no reason why you'd be disappointed with the GTX 670 at this price. So yeah, that was it. If you liked this video, consider liking and maybe even subscribing to support the growth of this channel. But on that note, I hope you have a good night and I hope to see you next time.